Okay, so now we've come out of the Byzantine Empire and we're going to look at early Russia. As Mr. Fox mentioned before, that the Byzantine missionaries started to travel outside of the Byzantine Empire and they moved up into the area of where the Slavs were, up in the northern regions of the area. So what we learned from the Byzantine legacy is that they preserved the Greek and Roman cultures, they preserved the Greek language, Greek and Roman knowledge were preserved in the Byzantine libraries, they had the Justinian Code, which were all of their laws written down so that they're easy to interpret and they're interpreted justly, and we had Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which came out of the Byzantine Empire. So now the Byzantine Empire is on the move. They spread the culture up into Russia through trade routes between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. Now you have to remember that when we're talking about Russia in this lesson, we're not talking about Russia today. This was a very small part of Northern Europe that they called Russia, although this part of the area of Eastern Europe was not really Russia. It was the area between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. It's the area where Poland is, where Latvia is, and up into those areas. So when they spread, they took Greek Orthodox Church, became the Russian Orthodox Church, all under the Eastern doctrine. St. Cyril created the Cyrillic alphabet to translate the Bible into the Slavic languages. In Russia and other Slavic languages are written in the Cyrillic alphabet still today. Church architecture and religious art also transferred from the Byzantine Empire. So you can see from this map of the areas where they moved out of, over here is Constantinople. So the Byzantine Empire beforehand was kind of, this area. So they went over here into the Slav areas, up in here to the Bulgars and the Avars, and they went up into this area north. So here's what the Cyrillic alphabet looks like. And remember, it's still used in the Slavic languages and also in Russia today. So for the geography of the Russia we're talking about, it was west of the Ural Mountains, which is basically where present-day Ukraine is. It's between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, which we showed on the map earlier. They had a lot of grasslands in the south, or steppes as they're known. Steppes is an important word, it's a vocabulary word, so remember that. And steppes are kind of like wheat fields that we have in the Midwest of the United States. They have dense forest and swamps in the north. They have three great rivers for trade and transportation in this area: the Dnieper, the Don, and the Volga. So here's what the Russian steppes look like. And you can see it's grasslands for farming and for cattle raising. So before there was a Russia, it started out before 800 CE, the forests and the grasslands were inhabited by Slavic farmers and traders, and they didn't really have any political unity or emperors, or they must have had village leaders and that kind of thing, but they weren't really a formed government or empire. So all the way from the north come the Vikings, or the Rus. They come from the Baltic Sea area, and they came from the north along the rivers and settled among the Slavic peoples. So here's a depiction of a Slavic village. You can see they lived in these, looks like almost they were slaughtering animals here, and they used bow and arrows to hunt and fish. They farmed, it looks like over here, and they had boats out here in the lakes or the rivers, and here's fishermen down here hauling in their catch. And they also had pottery, spears, not real civilized like the Byzantine Empire was. So in come the Vikings. Here's a memorial to the Vikings that came in. Looks like they're having a wedding here underneath the little depiction of a boat. So here's where the Vikings came in. They call it an invasion, but it doesn't necessarily sound like an invasion. It sounds like they just moved in, and the Slavs were nice people. We don't see anything where they're having a war or anything like that. So they come in from Norway area, Sweden, Danes up here is called. This is up in the Danes area. That's going to be basically Holland, Denmark area, and then you got Sweden here, Norwegians. These were all Viking people, and they came in through the bays, and then they came down the rivers. So you can see how they came down the Dnieper here, and the Volga's over here, and they came down, and you see the Volga goes all the way down here towards the Black Sea, and the Dnieper goes to the Black Sea. So they eventually were able to trade with Constantinople. So legend has Rurik the Rus, looks like a big Norwegian type guy, coming in and starting the resettlement of the Slavic areas. So they claim that he was invited to be the king. So that makes me think that they probably didn't have like wars that we're used to seeing between empires, that the Slavs welcomed the Vikings in to help them out. So he founded the city of Novgorod in 1862, and that was the first important trading city in Russia. And over time, the Russes, or the Vikings, and Slavs intermarried and became Russians. So eventually they move along, and they moved further south towards what we now know as Ukraine, and they found the city of Kiev. In 1880, a nobleman named Oleg moved south from Novgorod and founded the fortified city of Kiev on the Dnieper River. Here he established a principality, and the leader of all of Kiev is the Grand Prince. This location allowed the city to trade with distant lands, including Constantinople. Remember on the map previously, we saw how the river flowed right in to Constantinople. So here's a picture of a depiction of a pretty busy Kiev. It's hard to say what's going on here. Maybe this is a leader of the city, maybe giving a speech of some type, a public speech to people. So remember, the city of Kiev was trading with Constantinople, and also remember that monks went up into this area to convert the Slavs from Constantinople and convert them to the Orthodox Church. So thanks to the close ties with Constantinople through trade and heritage in the Orthodox Church, the city of Kiev and Rus grew wealthy and powerful. So you can see on this map just how they grew. And here's the Byzantine Empire down here. Here's Constantinople. So all of this area here, here's Kiev, which is in Ukraine now. And then all of this area here now we know is Russia, right? But we didn't know that then. It wasn't called Russia. This area over here was Russia at this point, but not all the way to the east here. So basically Russia was from this area here up until to the Baltic Sea up in here. So Kiev converts to Orthodox Christianity. Prince Vladimir of Kiev converted to Orthodox Christianity after his grandmother, Olga, who converted on a trip to Constantinople, but her son did not convert, Vladimir's father, but Vladimir did. He actually sent out advisors to find out about different religions in the regions, and he chose Orthodox Christianity. In 989, he had all of the residents of Kiev baptized in the Dnieper River to form a universally Christian Orthodox city and area, and he was the ruler of that, so it gave him much more power. And his goal was to unify the people of Kiev, which he did, so that worked out real well for him. So here's the baptism in the river. They baptized the whole city, so they probably did it in days or months. I don't know how they could have done it because it was a pretty big city, so they probably put some people in the river, baptized them, and they probably did it for a number of days in a row. So you can see here that Vladimir actually had quite a little empire. All of this was considered Kievan Rus, and then a little bit down here. So it turned into a pretty decent empire. You can see the Black Sea here is here. So it's all this area going up towards the Baltic Sea. So as we've seen in other empires or other countries, they're going to decline for one reason or another. It seems like all empires decline. The Roman Empire declined, the Greek empires declined. So now we're going to look at how Kiev declined. Yaroslav the Wise came to the throne in 1019. He created a legal code and built the first library in Kiev, which was a good thing. He died in 1054, but he did not select his oldest son to inherit the kingdom. So if he had an eldest son, then he must have had younger sons as well. So the problem you have now is there's no official heir to the throne. So his sons eventually tore the kingdom apart. They split it up and they tore it apart, very similar to what we saw Alexander's generals do back during Alexander's reign. So it's only going to get worse at this point. So now we got the Mongols who are coming out of the Asia area. And in 1240, the Mongols attacked and demolished Kiev. The Mongol Empire was called the Khanate of the Golden Horde. Led by Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. You remember Genghis Khan? The Mongols would rule Russia for the next 200 years. The good thing about the Mongols were they allowed religious freedom as long as their subject remained loyal to them and paid large amounts of tribute. And as we know, tribute is tax. And the Slavs called the Mongols the Tartars. So here's a couple pictures of Mongols. Very militaristic looking here in this picture here. And over here they look like very fierce warriors. Fierce and trained warriors. They're horsemen, expert horsemen, as we know from before. Just another quick pictures of the Mongols on their horses with their swords out, looking for anybody that they could kill. So you can see on this map, all of this light purple is Mongol area. You can see how much they had. You can see they're all the way down in India, and they're all the way up here, up into Asia. And this area in here is the Khanate of the Golden Horde. So this is the area they took over. Here we have Kiev. And then eventually we're going to have a city called Russia or Moscow. And Novgorod we saw up here before. So now we've got the growth of Moscow. And Moscow started to grow in the 1320s under Ivan I, who was known as the Prince of Moscow. He became very wealthy and very powerful thanks to providing favors to the Mongols. So he would help the Mongols however he could to put forward their ideas and their thoughts and their wishes in that area, and he would gain their favor by being a big help to them and having the people, toe the line basically, pay their tributes and so on. He convinced the Patriarch of Kiev to move to Moscow, making it the most important city in what was then known as Russia. Unfortunately, Russia is still cut off from the progress of Western Europe. So now we're almost into the Middle Ages here. So Europe really is starting to take off, and Russia's going to miss out on all of the new things that are happening in Western Europe, which we'll learn about later, and of course next year. So because of all these changes, the Russian Empire begins to emerge now. So as it continued to grow, it would become a genuine empire. It was no longer a couple cities in nowhere's land, and now it's becoming an empire. The Mongol influence had spread too thin because their empire was huge, as you saw on the map a couple slides ago. So they just couldn't control it, as we saw with other large empires who lost control because of the size and they just couldn't manage it, like the Roman Empire, for instance. So its leader, Ivan III, or Ivan the Great, challenged the Mongol rule, and he said, I'm going to take the name of Tsar, which in their language meant Caesar, and claimed his empire as the Third Rome. So then the inhabitants want Russia to be free of the Mongols. So in 1480, Ivan III just said that, you know what, we're not going to pay any more tribute to the Mongols, and we're done with you guys. Thank you. Get out of our country. We no longer want to be subservient to the Mongols, or we're not paying you any more money. So their armies gathered, but no battle broke out. Mr. Fox was talking about this a couple of days ago, about another incident where he used the Spider-Man analogies, where they pointed at each other and then nothing ever happened. Well, this is kind of what happened here. The armies gathered, no battle broke out, and the Mongols hightailed it for home. They probably wanted to go home anyway. They were so far away. So this frees Moscow from Mongol rule, and so then they can become their free people. So after this liberation, the Tsars of Russia openly expanded their borders. So here's a depiction of Ivan getting a letter from the Khan telling them, you are going to pay tribute, you are going to be our subjects. And Ivan says, no, we're not. Here's what I think about your letter. He ripped it up, threw it on the ground, and then eventually their armies faced off, but nothing happened, and the Mongols went home. Here's a picture of Ivan III. He's got his nice little hat on. He's got his neck covering on. Nice Russian type beard. Looks like a good guy. So as all great leaders, Ivan ends up leaving a legacy. So he ends up marrying Sophia, the niece of the last Byzantine emperor. He uses the double-headed eagle as a symbol of Russia, taken from the Byzantine Empire. That's down here in the corner. He rebuilds the Kremlin, or the Russian citadel. The Kremlin, Russian citadel, was used for churches, castles, government buildings. Today, the Kremlin's used for the head of the government, just like our Capitol building is here in Washington, D.C. And now Moscow has become the capital of modern-day Russia. Here's a depiction of Moscow. It looks kind of like a small city at the time, but you can see the Christian influence up here on the top of this church. You got a cross up here, so you can see that they certainly were still following Christianity at this point. So as Ivan expanded the empire, he also had to take over other cities and towns. And here's a depiction of a city they took over, and he leaves it in ruins. And you can see up here, it looks pretty cold. So that's what we think of Russia today. We think of cold and rough winters. This is a famous cathedral in Moscow, St. Basil's Cathedral. They call the tops of these cathedrals, these bowls here, they call these onion domes. In all Orthodox cathedrals, you'll see these onion, in Orthodox churches, you'll see these onion domes. And here's a picture here, as you can see, of more churches, onion domes, and crosses on the top. You can see all of that. So that ends up our last section of this unit. So we'll probably take a break now, and then when we come back, we'll get ready for the test that's this week.